everyone, this is Professor Hall, and today I'm going to be talking about how I learned grammar as a child and as an adult, and also why I have decided to teach grammar the way that I will be teaching it. So this is kind of an unusual video for me because I do have some videos for other instructors and other professors, and I have other videos for students, and this is kind of both. So if you are in English, or if you teach a foreign language or a language, other than English, then you can hopefully learn something from this video. And if you're one of my students, I hope that you can kind of gain a better understanding of why we're doing things in our class the way that we're doing them. So let's get started. So I want to open with this question of what is metacognition. And if you are one of my students, this is the reason I decided to create this video. Let me get my pen here. The word meta means comprehensive, and then the word cognition means the process of acquiring knowledge or learning. So metacognition is kind of like, if we break down the word, means comprehensive learning. But basically, it's kind of like thinking about how you think and how you learn. For little kids, this means like if they read a book, they might say to themselves, what do I feel about this? What am I seeing here? What am I noticing? What am I thinking? It's kind of a natural process that children have. And sometimes as adults, we lose that curiosity. But if you're a college student and you're an adult, metacognition has some of these components for adult learning. So you might ask, how is this relevant? Why do I have to learn grammar? Why do I have to learn algebra? How is it going to be relevant to my life? How does it fit with my experience? So what do I know already? What can I learn? What can I take away? And how is this going to be practical? Am I going to use it now or later? And I really hope that this kind of answers at least some of those questions. It's practical because with grammar, we use it in our daily lives for communication, for speaking, and for writing. And I hope that the classes that I teach, especially for composition and college writing workshop, college composition 2, and other technical writing, other writing-based courses, that these are things that you can take with you not only for your other classes in college, but also for your career path after that. So I just want to talk a little bit about how we learn grammar and how people tend to teach it. And I'm going to start with this idea. Grammar is like basketball. So let me tell you about some of my horrifying experiences with basketball. We had a basketball hoop in our front yard by our driveway growing up. A little hoop that my parents put in. Not even a permanent one, but one of those ones that you roll out. And I loved shooting hoops with my mom and dad and my brother, and we would play games of horse. We would have friends come over, and we would just kind of, stand around in a circle and throw the ball up and whatever. And so I wanted to join a basketball club or group. I was too young for it to be like a sport in school. So I went to the Y and took basketball during the summer. I don't know if you would call it a class or just like a club or what have you, but at any rate, I went and played basketball. And here's the thing. By this time, I think I was in about 5th grade, and everybody else who was there, this is not me, this is just a picture I kind of grabbed, but everybody else who was there had been playing basketball every single summer. Even if some of them were younger than me in like 3rd, 4th grade, some of them were in 6th grade, 7th grade. And I had never actually played a game of basketball. So what ended up happening is that the coach of our team didn't explain the rules to anybody because most of the people already knew the rules. And I'm kind of like this girl right right here with her arms up, like, I don't know really what's going on. I literally ended up the entire summer just kind of running wherever the people were running. And my coach would scream at me, get the rebound, get the rebound. I did not know what that word meant. I didn't know what he was talking about. I was kind of too embarrassed to ask what he was talking about because I felt like I should just know. I got in trouble for things like double dribbling, which again, I didn't even know that word, let alone know that it was not the right thing to do. So it was so frustrating. And I don't even know if I lasted the whole summer. I might have just said to my mom, I don't want to go anymore and kind of drop out. A couple years later, I think in about sixth grade, I had a gym class where we were doing a unit on basketball. And we looked at diagrams like this and we took multiple choice tests. I found this online, but this is almost exactly the test that I took. How long have people played basketball? Where was the game invented? Who invented it? What are the following are basketball terms? All of that. And we did that. I kid you not. We looked at diagrams and learned the rules for about 3 weeks. Then the fourth week, we played one game just with the girls, and then we played a second game where the boys joined in from the boys gym class, and that was it. So again, very frustrating because I really wanted to play basketball, but reading things like push the ball up with your arms and let the ball roll off the tips of your fingers to make a basket, or make sure that you block. Well, that doesn't make any sense if you're not actually doing the practice. And that's sort of what happens with grammar. We're going to talk about in a minute. We either have a lot of the first type, like sort of how I learned how to play basketball the first time, where there's all practice, but there's no explanation of the rules. Or sometimes we go too far in the other direction and it's all here's this rule and here's this rule and you need to memorize this and you have to know this list of vocabulary words, like for the SATs, for example, or to read this passage, but there's no actual practice. And this is what's known in education as the pendulum. So you can think of a pendulum kind of like on a clock. If you've ever seen an old big like grandfather clock, it has this thing swinging back and forth, going from one side to the other. In education, we often see people taking up one method of teaching, and then educators kind of see the problem with that method and they overcorrect and move all the way over to the other side. So it's kind of like the two ways that I learned basketball. The first, way over here, all practice and no explicit teaching. That means that the teacher didn't go over the terms or the rules or have an actual class where the coach didn't lecture us or teach us about things. And the second was way over here on the other side, all explicit teaching, but no implied or implicit learning. So no actual practice until that last week. And then we switched on to volleyball and did the exact same thing. Just learned the rules of volleyball for weeks and weeks. So neither of these were very balanced at all. And when I started teaching at first, I kind of thought back to my experiences learning grammar and how I basically had experiences both over here and over here on both sides of the pendulum. So the first way that I learned grammar was implicitly. Implicit means that a teacher guides a student through learning, but never actually presents the rules directly. So this, when I was going through school, you know, if you're one of my students, you don't need to memorize this. I just want to kind of talk about what I went through and what you've probably gone through in your lives as well. But back when I was in school as a young student in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, I had teachers who believed in the whole language approach. And that means that we do reading prediction, comprehension questions. So for example, a picture of something, and then they'd say, what do you think is going to happen next? So there's a girl who's about who's standing at the edge of the pool, and I might predict, oh, she's going to jump in and go swimming, and somebody else might predict, oh, she's going to lay down and get a tan. So yeah, predicting clues in stories, things that you already know and what might happen next. We kind of learn storytelling that way. Reading to learn grammar. So you look at a text, a book or a story, and you kind of see how the sentences are put together. Vocabulary, words by context. So that means that if you're reading something and you know 4 of the words and you don't know the 5th word, you can maybe kind of figure out what the author is trying to say because of the words that you know. And sentence structures and syntax by example again. So a lot of emphasis on reading and writing without actually learning, like, here's how an essay is structured, here's how a sentence is structured, here are the types of punctuation you should use. The idea would be that you kind of read a lot and you see how the punctuation is used. This is an example of something that I would have been asked to do at that point. Here's the question: would you rather sleep all day or stay up all night? Now, probably we had read something about somebody who slept all day and stayed up all night. And then the idea for little kids is, right, you draw a picture. I'm trying to with the mouse here. This is probably about how it would have looked. I can draw, but just as an example, it would have looked like this. Here's me sleeping all day, right? On a couch or a bed or whatever the case may be. And I'll put a smile and some Z's. Show I'm sleeping. So it would look like that. And then the lines are here. And you'd write like, my dad sleeps all day, or, whatever the case may be. And then the teacher would look it over and she might save them. She might give me, back then, I don't know if I would have gotten feedback at all. It was just kind of some practice and a learning exercise. So you read something about somebody sleeping all day, then you write something. And the idea is that you kind of, it's a lot like that basketball. Some people can kind of pick up what's going on, and other people are going to be kind of running back and forth just with everybody else, not really fully understanding, but looking maybe even as if they do. So here's an example. 45 preschool farm theme ideas. So whole language would combine speaking, listening, reading, and writing. There's a focus on all 4 of those things. And it's multimedia and multimodal. That means that we use different types of media like videos and songs and games. And multimodal means that there's different types of teaching methods or modes. So I teach you by, when I did teach preschool actually for a while, and you would do like, hey, we're going to have a circle time and we're going to do a farm thing and we'll talk about animals and we'll learn different animal sounds. And then we're going to do reading time where we're going to read a book about animals and we're going to learn what life is like on the farm. Then we're going to bring somebody in to come and talk about how he's a farmer and what he does all day, right? So they're themed units a lot of times to learn and reinforce vocabulary and ideas. That's true even of like high school teaching. It doesn't necessarily have to be little kids, and college too. We have different themes for each unit of my college composition class to kind of understand some complex thoughts or ideas or even current events. Errors in this are a part of learning. So if you make a mistake, that's okay. It's just part of practice. And it's also student focused, which means it's a lot less of the teacher talking at you and a lot more of students doing things either by themselves or together in groups and eventually kind of coming together as a community of learners. So the results of this are kind of interesting. If you look at it, it looks like a lot of fun, right? Learning reading organically, similar to learning how we talk. Learning how to talk. So, a lot of times, sometimes there are people like speech language pathologists who teach people how to speak properly. And there are certainly communication professors who have to teach you how to make different types of speeches for different um, situations. But when we actually learn to speak, we don't have that explicit learning. Nobody has to say, this sounds like ooh, this sounds like oh. We kind of just pick up talking from hearing other people talk. So the idea is that you learn reading and writing, or you learn writing by reading. And many people who were taught this way love to read because the error was part of their learning. So if they ever made a mistake, it was okay, and they got excited about reading. Other people who learned this way feel like they never really learned the rules of writing, and they had a lot of difficulty understanding how to guess the rules just by reading. So, if that's you, it might look like struggling with reading, skipping words you didn't know, trying to memorize words because you didn't really understand how to read the full word, relying on pictures for context, which is something little kids do, and it gets harder as you go into, as you get older. And a lot of the students who learned just in this way became frustrated because eventually what happened is that they were asked to write an essay, for example, or write a story if they were younger, and they were expected to kind of know how to do that and how to put it together, and how to not make grammatical errors without ever really being taught the rules. So, teachers who learned this way, what I find interesting is that teachers who learned in this whole language approach, again, it's called whole language because it's speaking, reading, writing, and listening. What happens with some of the teachers, not all, but some of them, go the opposite direction. So, if you think about that pendulum again, they swing from one end to the other. And they end up teaching the rules of grammar from a textbook with a lot of multiple choice tests, a lot of quizzes, because they don't really know the rules themselves. So they don't feel comfortable teaching grammar. So they love teaching writing and they love talking about books in class. But when it comes to grammar, they feel kind of like, some of the comments I've heard people make are, why doesn't my student just know this stuff? It comes naturally to me. How come it doesn't come naturally to them? Or they might say, oh, kids today don't read enough. If they just read more, they would understand how to put these sentences together. Sometimes they also will put comments on papers like, this sentence sounds awkward, but they don't have the actual knowledge to know precisely what's wrong with the student's sentence to teach the student how to correct it. And I have to say that I think in past I've been I had a lot of whole language instruction, and I kind of fell into this trap of, okay, well, we are going to read, but I don't know if really they'll learn the grammar from that, so let me do a lot of multiple choice questions and teach them the rules for a really long time. I had a well, I've worked at a couple different schools and was sort of asked to teach grammar in different ways. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But my other experiences growing up were with explicit grammar. And this I actually ran into in middle school. So I was in explicit grammar means that a teacher teaches the rules of grammar directly with lessons and exercises. So kind of like what I was saying before, it's like things like phonics, breaking words down into small components. A digraph is a blend of two letters that make a sound. So this is shoe. So would it match with ship, city, happy, or hay? It matches with ship. Snail, snip. Cat, cans, and you do that kind of a thing. This is known as structured literacy, and it's called structured because unlike whole language, which looks at all of the pieces of language, and it looks at a big piece of text all at once, structured literacy breaks everything down into small steps and then has very clear goals for each lesson. So breaking things down into small components, learning the rules for spelling, grammar, and syntax. So a lot of spelling tests, taking tests in spelling and phonics, which is breaking the words down in small components by how they sound. Lots of memorization of vocabulary. And then this, I hated this so much. I hated this almost as much as I hated those basketball multiple choice texts. We had to, in 7th grade for months, take pieces of text, take paragraphs, boring paragraphs, and do sentence diagrams. If you've never had to do this, good for you. I'm glad that you never had this experience. As a teacher, it has helped me, but as a student, oh my goodness. And unless you're teaching English, I don't know why you would even need to do this. But you basically put the subject in one spot and then a break and then the verb and then other words go off of that. And this same teacher also made us memorize the list of prepositions. She made us memorize a list of dependent clause words. She had us memorize vocabulary words. And by the end of it, I loved reading. And I don't think we read one book in her class through the whole year. And I think actually she read the book to us and then told us kind of what was going on and what it meant. So really there was no discussion. There was no fun really at all. And so emphasis on writing and standardized testing. So what happens sometimes with this is that the people who have learned this way know all the rules, but kind of like me in the gym class with basketball, you never actually practice, so you can't apply anything. And I found a lot of this happens with students who are learning English as a second or third or fourth language, because the way that they're taught in their home country is through a lot of memorization and a lot of the actual rules. So if I were to give them a multiple choice test, they would do very well on it. But then when it comes to the paragraph writing or essay writing, they don't feel as confident. So here's an example of what this would look like. This is a book series that was created because of this approach of structured literacy, called the Dick and Jane series. So instead of that preschool thing we saw before with themed units, the students would read a book like this. Dick went to the hen house. Spot and Puff went too. Oh, said Dick, look at the eggs. Here are the eggs for grandmother. Almost every book of this series is structured like this. There's a repetition of words. We look first, so the picture is there for context. Then Dick looks at them, look at the eggs, and then he repeats, here are the eggs. So it's matching the picture with the text. And you can kind of see how for students, this really little kids, this would be helpful. We have the word eggs twice, and we have the picture of the eggs. So it would be easy to learn the word eggs because it's there twice and there's the picture. And then the next page says, Grandmother, I brought you eggs. Look, here are the eggs. I brought them to you, right? So we have grandmother twice. We have the word Dick twice. And that would help students to read. So basically this type of teaching helps people to know the rules and be able to write grammatically correct sentences. Has very clear goals with one lesson building on another, moving toward the mastery of a concept. However, people who are taught this way often say that they hate English. And I get that a lot. in class. I have some people who are like, "Oh, I love reading," but they don't really know the rules of writing. That's the people who kind of came from a whole language approach. And then people who came from this say they hate English. And I think it's because there's a lot of rules. The rules are confusing. They were able maybe to learn them for a test, but they can't really apply them. And it seems boring. And if you were reading a book like this, Dick and Jane has helped many children learn how to read, but I was exposed to some of these as a kid, and my goodness, they drove me crazy. Look, Jane, look, here are the eggs. I got the eggs. And as a person who had another class with whole learning when we were reading really interesting things, oh, it just drove me crazy. So I think if you're a student, I hope that you can kind of relate to one of these two types of things. As teachers, a lot of teachers who were taught using a structured literacy approach swing the other way toward whole language. So they remember loving to read and write, but they had that love kind of diminished or, whoops. So yeah, they have that love kind of lessened or taken away because they had to do all of these really long, boring tests and complicated rules. So if you learned this way and you're a student, a lot of times what I hear students say is, when I was younger, I loved reading so much stuff and I don't know what happened, but now I don't like English. And typically this is why, that maybe you had a lot of whole language when you were younger. When you got to a certain level, then they either expected you to know the rules or they were teaching the rules over and over and over, and it became so boring you just didn't care, and confusing. So with teachers, when it comes to feedback, they might know the rules on how to fix a grammatical error, but they're trying to encourage students to just figure it out and see whether the sentence sounds correct. But it's hard for people to know, right? The same way with whole language people, if they're just doing multiple choice tests, and also people who came out of this try to maybe briefly explain a concept that they understand, but their student doesn't really have context for. So I heard a colleague at a school I used to work at doing this, where she was like, "Oh, well, the problem here is that's just a misplaced modifier, so you just have to move it." And then the student just kind of walked away and was like, "What?" It doesn't make sense because the teacher isn't really using the approach the way that they were taught. So they're using these complex terms, or like, "Well, you have a dangling participle," and then they'll just like mark that on the paper, and the student's like, "I don't know what that means." Kind of like when I was playing basketball and my coach was like, "Get the rebound," and I was like, I don't understand what you're trying to say. A rebound, by the way, is when it bounces off and somebody misses a shot, and then you're there to grab the ball and try to shoot again. But it took me quite a long time before I realized that, because of the way I was taught. So then I also looked at learning a second language myself as an adult. So this is almost what my classroom looks like. Sometimes at our school we have, I think there were people at one point, we did a survey and there were people from 80 different countries at our college. I hadn't had any second language instruction since high school, and I wanted to think about how I learned best so that I could see what methods might work best for my students. I was shuffling between different requirements from various schools. So one school where I worked, we had 12 grammar rules that we were supposed to teach, and we were supposed to go over these rules over and over and over again, with the idea that students would learn them. There was a long, what they called a silent period, which meant that basically for the first couple weeks, it was just me teaching and the students weren't really saying anything or participating. The idea is that during that silent period, students would build up courage and confidence because they would be learning the rules. But what really ended up happening was that they drop out because it was boring and confusing. So a different school where I worked, we didn't have any grammar instruction, and we were really just encouraged to read with them and talk and discuss current events. And so then when it came to grading papers, I was kind of like, trying to then explain the rules in my comments on papers, and students weren't understanding because they weren't getting that kind of direct instruction. So neither of these methods really worked. And I was like, well, if I were learning a second language, and this isn't just about grammar for people who are learning English as a second language, but I wanted to learn a new language, to see how I learned and that kind of thing. So I got a number of apps and programs. I downloaded Duolingo, Mango Languages, and Rosetta Stone. All three of them because I don't do anything part way apparently. And with Rosetta Stone, what I liked is that it had a lot of levels. So if I really wanted to be, I took French because I had taken Latin in high school, and I thought that French, I knew some of the structures are similar to Latin, so I thought it would be kind of easy for me to learn. Also, we don't live that far from Quebec, so I thought that would be kind of fun too, to learn French and then go to Quebec. And then the coronavirus hit, and I never got to go there yet, but I will soon, as soon as it clears up. But at any rate, I liked the repetition. I liked that it had so many levels, like really up to fully advanced. It did seem to me kind of disorganized though, so I didn't see how things were connected. And it costs a lot of money, so that was kind of an issue in terms of access. If you're a student, we talk about access, meaning like I don't have a textbook for some of my classes because some students can't really afford a textbook, right? So that gives equal access to everyone. For other classes, I have a textbook, but I try to keep the cost under $50. I know sometimes college textbook can be like $500. So Mango Languages had a lot of grammar rules and explanations, but it wasn't really that thorough. So when I looked through it, you could get to a certain level, and then that was kind of it. And it wasn't quite as fun. And Duolingo was super fun. It was gamified. So everything in there, learning the language, learning French, was kind of like a game. There was listening exercises. There were stories. They also had like a board with, you could earn points for doing different exercises and getting things right. And getting things wrong was just kind of like, hey, let's just do more practice and earn more points for doing more practice. So it was really, really a fun way to learn a language. The problem, and the stories really helped me the most because that's, what I enjoy. I teach English. I love stories. I'm also an author. I love writing stories. I found for me what was interesting as I was learning is that all of these four components that we were talking about with whole language, reading and listening and speaking, reading French was quite, I won't say quite easy, but it was easier than the other things. I know a lot of Latin, so the vocabulary was kind of easier for me to pick up. The listening exercises were very difficult. The words on the page to me would be pronounced completely differently, right? So that was something that I'm sure a lot of English students feel annoyed with as well. We have like words that look the same but are pronounced different. We have words that are pronounced the same but look different. So read and read, R-E-A-D, R-E-E-D. Read and read, R-E-A-D, R-E-A-D. Read and read, R-E-A-D, R-E-D, right? So I can understand how that would be confusing for people. Speaking was difficult too because I couldn't really hear some of the differences. So when I did the speaking exercises, I didn't do them as well. So reading was easy. Writing was a little bit harder, but not quite as hard. And the listening and speaking I struggled with. So that's something, especially if you're a teacher and you're watching this, to know that some of your students, I've had students who can read English quite proficiently, but have a very difficult time listening to my lectures because their listening skills are not as strong. I have other students who can read, write, and listen in English quite well, and they have a lot of problems with pronunciation. And so they have a very thick accent. And sometimes people are prejudiced against them because of that. They think that they're stupid or that they don't know English, when really 3 of the 4 components are there. So that's something to keep in mind for your own students. But at any rate, when I was doing Duolingo, failing was not punished. It was an opportunity to increase learning. And the gamification really worked for me. I wanted to learn the language, but then I started wanting to beat people on the game boards. So learn more words and get more points. And they'd give you little badges for different milestones and stuff like that. At a certain point, then I didn't care about that. And then I didn't really want to do the games anymore. So it's interesting how your motivation changes. And your motivation, if you're a student, might change too. You know, first you might want to just get an A, then you might want to actually learn the skills for the next class. Then you might actually want the information from a class to take with you to your job, for example. Other things that I did, my skill level didn't always go up. Sometimes I had a bad day and I couldn't concentrate. There were other times when I forgot a word that I knew the day before, really for no real reason, but I did keep improving. So if you're a student, know that you're not maybe going to get everything right every single time. You might forget something that you knew yesterday, but you can reinforce that. And then I did learning through Netflix, which I thought was in here. Yeah, but at any rate, Netflix was awesome. Netflix and Hulu. And what I would do was I watched some things in English, regular US TV shows with French subtitles. Sometimes I would watch French TV shows with English subtitles. Sometimes I just watched the French TV show to improve my listening and didn't have any subtitles at all. And other times I watched a couple programs that I knew really well, like The Office, where I've seen it a number of times, and I just watched it in French because I already knew what was going on. So it was really helpful to improve some of my reading and listening skills, to connect vocabulary words, and to see how language was used in real life. Like, you're not going to get, hey, you want to go out for drinks later? Okay, sounds good. You're not going to get that kind of dialogue usually in a reading. So seeing the how it was actually used was great. The difficulty is that with Duolingo, it was fun. They did emphasize all 4 skills, but there were no real full explanation of the rules. So the message boards were filled with things like this. Sometimes I could make sense of things based on what I knew of English grammar and Latin, but other times the rules were really confusing because they'd have an exercise where you're switching verb tense, for example, from present to past. And I didn't know how to do that. And so the exercise didn't make sense. I kept getting things wrong. And a lot of people kind of felt the same way. So I supplemented that app with a textbook from one of my colleagues. She lent me a few books of French so that I could actually read the rules and see some of the grammar, the grammar terms and syntax and how things were put together. And that really helped. And I kind of realized at that point, oh yeah, you really do need both. You can't just learn things completely implicitly. On the other hand, if I had just had the textbook, I would not have had the listening skills. I would not have had the pronunciation skills. And certainly not the textbook that I was looking at any rate didn't really have stories in it. So it wouldn't have helped me kind of put things together, create my own dialogue, do practice, that kind of thing. So yeah, I did watch TV shows in French, and I watched English with French subtitles. I listened to French podcasts. They have some podcasts for people learning French that were basically talking about the news in French, and then they'd have a person come in English and kind of explain what the French person had just said. I read news articles in French and translated them. I read some short stories. A lot of them were for children, but that was interesting too. Some of the French TV shows I watched were also for kids. So, like, it's interesting watching The Cat in the Hat in French, where it's a very simple words and it's a lot of repetition, kind of like the Dick and Jane books we were talking about before, right? If you think about Green Eggs and Ham, I do not like them, Sam. I do not like them on a boat. I do not like them. Well, so then if you're listening to that in a new language, I do not like them was very easy for me to pick up and remember because of that repetition. So, I kind of, think that on the one hand, the case for whole language, looking at all four of those skills, the listening, the pronunciation, the reading, the writing, it is more natural. And this is from Goodman, 1986. Language is easy when it's natural, it's sensible, it's interesting, it's relevant. It's hard when it's artificial, it's broken into bits and pieces. I have kind of I'll come back to that. It's nonsense, it's dull and uninteresting, and it's irrelevant. And other things here: no social value, no discernible person, and imposed by someone else. So I think the only thing here is that it's broken into bits and pieces. To me, I think that you do need both in teaching English for many years and in trying to learn a second language myself. But the other things I think here are correct. If you have things out of context with no social value, if it's completely imposed upon you by a teacher, then you don't really want to learn. And especially if it's irrelevant and this is, I think, to me, the key. You're powerless. Versus it's easy if you have the power to use it, the power to practice, the power to discuss, the power to choose maybe what you're going to write about in some cases, all of that. The case for structured literacy, that explicit approach, it's systematic, so the things are organized in a logical way. There's a sequence with easy concepts first, and then you progress to more difficult things. So each lesson builds upon what you've learned before. And this helps you to build confidence. It helps you to understand, the the breaking down of parts. Parts of a sentence, for example, then the sentence as a whole, then a paragraph, then an essay, then and in between there possibly mixing whole language, writing a paragraph, writing a sentence, writing an essay. Intentional. So there's not in this there's not just like, hey, let's just read this and see what we think of it, right? There's a reason for everything. And however, it can also seem kind of boring at times. So I kind of think of these like a zoom lens and a panorama, right? The explicit teaching is kind of like a zoom lens. Let's zoom in on this poppy. Let's look at the petals. Let's look at all the little water droplets, and apparently the watermark that's still on there. Let's look at how this sentence is structured. Let's look at if it's a fragment, why, and what that means, and how is that fixed, and what's the rule of complete sentences. And then zooming out and doing a lot more practice and discussion and looking at an example from it's called authentic material. Authentic material means that it's from the real world. So I use that in my classes. Here's so talking about sentence fragments, there's an author who's very well known who has a lot of sentence fragments in his work. So we look at that and we kind of talk about it, and we're like, how come he has a sentence fragment even though he is an author and he makes a lot of money writing books? Why does he use sentence fragments? How are they helpful sometimes? What times, how are they confusing? Practicing writing a paragraph and getting feedback and reading something relevant to today. a current event that's going on, and kind of learning about the concepts of argument, for example, as opposed to zooming in and learning the 3 pillars of argument and those kind of things. So you really, really do need both. And the rule typically is the 80-20 rule. So about 20% of the time, I have to admit, a little bit more for an online class because there's less discussion that happens. But 20% of the time, looking at sort of the rules and regulations, overall making sure that we have scaffolding, which means if you think about a building scaffolding, one thing builds upon the next. That's sort of part of the lesson as a whole. And then 80% of the time is discussion, reading, research, practice, and then the actual essay writing kind of would fall into that as well. So that you do get a little bit of both. You can kind of think of like the second way I learned basketball was reversed. It was 80% rules and 20% playing. So if the coach in the first way I'd learned basketball had taken 20 minutes to teach me what the rules were, or to reinforce those rules just at the beginning of every game. Hey guys, remember that you can't dribble and then stop and walk and then dribble again, right? You can't stand outside of the lines. Just remember that. Okay, good. Go ahead and play. It needs to be balanced, but it needs to be the right type of balance as well. So, the approach to reading and writing, I'm going to fall here right in the middle, balanced literacy. People who learn best by breaking things down and looking at them by pieces get those pieces. Other people who learn best by hands-on stuff and peer interaction, building a community, looking at a whole piece of writing, they're going to get that as well. So if you fall into one of those groups and you hate the structured part where I am teaching the rules of grammar, just know that we will be looking at authentic materials, things like books and songs and articles and websites and things like that. And if you are a person who is confused by that approach, just know that we will be going over some of the rules as well. So we're going to be doing both. I flipped the pendulum upside down and now it looks like a metronome for people who play music. It keeps time. So in our class, the process for writing is that we kind of learn about the principles of a type of writing. That's that explicit structured literacy approach. Then we read about a topic. Sometimes we'll watch videos on that topic too. I try to have like a TED Talk or a YouTube video, sometimes a documentary for you guys to watch to kind of reinforce those ideas. And then we talk about it. So all of these things kind of fall into that whole language approach, right? Reading and discussing. Then you do research, which again is kind of practice. A lot of times I help you with it. So it's a little bit of mix again between explicit and implicit. Then you'll discuss or analyze that research. Again, that whole language approach. Then you'll write, and then I give you feedback, which is, again, a little bit more structured, more directly from me. So you can kind of see, I marked this the wrong way, so let me erase it. You can kind of see like here and here, the beginning and the end, and sometimes a little bit in the middle while you're researching or while you're writing. That's when I kind of step in and give direct instruction and then guidance to lead you through various parts of the writing process. And it is a process. And we'll talk about that later, but it is a process. But yeah, I don't want to just do way over here. I'm going to teach you about this type of writing over and over and over. And then I'm going to have you quickly write, and then I'm going to give you feedback, right? And I also don't want to give you no instruction where it's just you talking and trying to learn from each other. You really do need both. And then you revise based on the feedback of me, sometimes of your peers. Those are other people in your class, right? And then you moving toward balance. So there's a little bit of explicit, a lot of research, discussion, and practice, and building confidence before we write, and then using that feedback. Even if you don't get the best grade or the grade you were hoping for, usually you have the chance to revise and redo your work and fix those things. So it's an opportunity for learning rather than like just a punishment, as some classes might be. Specifically, when we do grammar, we kind of use these steps here. Presentation is me talking. Then we do some practice. I might explain it again. We do more practice, and then you use it in real life. So I'll present very briefly in these YouTube videos the rules of a certain grammar error or syntax or punctuation or whatever the case may be. Then also in the videos and possibly together in class, we look at a variety of different texts. So we start with some sentences and pairs of sentences. Then we look at paragraphs from websites and books and sometimes songs and dialogues from videos or movies, that kind of thing. And then we look at errors and corrections and stuff like that. We discuss how those concepts are relevant, and then you'll be doing some practice. So we're using, at the time I'm making this, gamified software that adapts to your needs and speed of learning. So if you do take you do a module, a unit of work on one concept and you get all the questions right, then you get all the questions right and you don't need any practice. If you do 20 questions and you only get 2 of them right, congratulations, you've gotten 2 out of 20, and next time you might get 5 or 6, and then the time after that you might get 8, and then the time after that you might get 15, and then you can kind of work your way through at the pace you need. Examine errors in your own drafts and in the work of your peers. So I will sometimes take things with your permission and not your name on them. And we'll look at them together as a class and talk about, hey, what did this person do really well? Oh, yeah, they have what's called a comma splice there. How do we fix that? So again, a real world text and something that's relevant. And then work towards working on your own to find and fix the errors by yourself. So again, that's getting into that communicative expression after you've done the practice in class. So hopefully, my hope for you, I love this quote, there's nothing like watching struggling students discover they can learn. And I hope that you're motivated to learn. Many of my students come in thinking that they need help with grammar. Sometimes that's not actually the problem, and the problem turns out to be something else. And we kind of do that same process. So I have a lot of lectures about transitions. We look at the rules for transitions. Then we look at how to transition with sentences, and then we look at authentic materials. Here are some paragraphs from websites that didn't transition very well. Here's a newspaper article that didn't transition very well. What could they have done better? For those of you who do need and want grammar help, my hope is that you better understand all those confusing rules that you didn't learn before, or you learned and forgot, or you heard about but didn't really understand. And I further hope that you get a lot out of the implicit teaching and guiding and discussion as well. So the readings and the excerpts that we're examining, the things that we're talking about in class, the sample essays that I give you to take a look at and discuss. The gamified program, it might not be quite as fun as Duolingo was for me, but it does make practicing grammar a little bit less boring. And I do think that the way that it's set up is more authentic. It's set up like you are looking at text that maybe you or somebody else wrote, where you have to find and correct the problem. So it's not just sitting there doing multiple choice bubbles and diagramming sentences like I had to in 7th grade. And lastly, you might not achieve mastery, but you can and probably will learn something that can help you later on. So if you think of it kind of like, here's steps, right? Up here is maybe a world famous author. And down here is somebody who's just learning English for the first day. It's their first day. They're just coming to the bottom of the steps. So maybe you feel like you're here. Um that's a smiley face. It's so hard to write with a mouse. Sorry, guys. Maybe you feel like you're kind of here. Like, if you're on step 2, I hope that I can help you get to step 3 or 4. If you're on step 4, I hope I can help you get to step 5. If you feel like you're on step 5 already and that's where you want and need to be, hopefully I can help you reinforce that, the concepts that you know, maybe learn a little bit of something, and anything that you can kind of take with you. So those are my hopes for you. And I hope that this was helpful as well, to think about how you've learned grammar before in the past, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, and what things you can maybe look for going forward. Maybe you know the rules, but you need the authentic text to kind of practice, and you need to do things like journal entries and discussion boards to practice what you've learned. Maybe you've done things like journal entries and discussion boards and you write, but you don't really know the rules, and you break them and you don't really know how to fix them. And if you're a teacher, I hope that you learn something too and take something with you for your classes. Are you more structured? Are you more whole language? Do you want to be more one or the other? Do you want to have a balance of both? So that's it. Thanks, everybody.